From FingerLakes1.com, I'm Josh Durso, and this is Inside the FLX. Our program today begins in Yates County this past weekend. In a span of just roughly 72 hours, there were 2 confirmed overdoses in the village of Penn Yan. Officers Brad Conover and Derek Chisholm were credited with saving the lives of both of those overdose victims with a well-known field-administered reversal treatment. Naloxone, or Narcan, is credited with saving thousands of lives annually and has become a part of the toolkit for first responders everywhere. The CDC says thousands of fatal overdoses are prevented yearly because of these opioid reversal treatments, but there is a debate. Does Naloxone or Narcan enable users, and is it effectively dealing with the opioid epidemic? To answer these questions and many more, we have Petrea Rae, coordinator for the Substance Abuse Coalition of Ontario County, which falls under the purview of the Partnership for Ontario County, here in studio. Welcome back, Petrea. You've been here, I think this is what, third time?
I think this is my third time. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so before we get into those questions and what you guys are doing and all the awesome things that are going on, let's talk about the sort of basic of what is a substance abuse coalition?
Yeah, so our coalition, and like other coalitions around the state, we work with community members from various facets of the community: law enforcement, school officials, public health people, mental health people, basically all of your agencies, including prevention and treatment, to prevent substance misuse in our community. We also bring in parents, people in recovery, and just general community members who really want to see a positive change in their community and fight what might be going on in their community, depending on if it's underage drinking, the legalization of marijuana, the opioid crisis. Whatever really is the focus of that individual community, we bring them together and we help them on those prevention efforts. Mm-hmm. So that's what our coalition's focused on, as is Seneca and Yates and the other surrounding counties.
So obviously part of the discussion and dialogue is part of this whole effort, right? But there's been some language change pertaining to the substance abuse side. So it's not substance abuse, it's preferred to be substance use disorder, yep. Which I think is really interesting for a lot of different reasons, mainly because I'm interested in words. Words yep. are my thing. So walk us through why the language change and why that's important for maybe even helping to remove some of that stigma.
It is. So, and that's the main reason that I think the language change, is to destigmatize addiction and substance abuse, and as a coalition, our title is Substance Abuse Prevention Coalition. So, we've talked about, do we change our name?
Is there a branding change that needs to happen?
Is there a branding change that needs to happen? Because the word abuse in nature is negative in connotation. And so we're trying to take away that negative connotation to the fact that people who are on this journey, or people who are trying to prevent to go on this journey, we're trying to prevent that misuse of a substance to alter your state, and so that you don't go down this chronic illness path. Right. And many years ago, we used the words like addiction, we used the words like staying clean, we used, and those all have a negative connotation. So we're trying to move that conversation so that we look at the people who may have gone down this path as just like somebody who has diabetes, just like somebody who might have cancer, that they have a chronic illness that they now have to work on preventing relapse mm-hmm. and staying on that positive path, and so taking away some of those negative terms like abuse.
Is it taking like some of the, as I listen to these types of discussions, I always say, is it taking the volatility out of it and trying to bring it down to a more neutral place where everybody can just sort of look at it and say, okay, here are the facts, yep. here's what is and what isn't, yep. and let's find the best path forward. Yeah,
so here's the facts. You've stumbled down a path where for you to feel normal, you use a substance that has a negative consequence on your life. So how can we stop that and help you get on a path where, like other people, you can hold gainful employment, you can be a successful part of society, you can be a citizen, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's just helping them down that path without having that stigma, mm-hmm. if that makes sense. So that's why I think we've made that transition, in my layman's terms, because I'm not in treatment and recovery, right. Away from substance abuse to substance misuse or substance use disorder. So it has just,
So I guess for those who might not be involved with this sort of discussion currently, they might be wondering, well, how does one get to that place? What are some of the ways that common ways that people go down this path and end up with some sort of substance use disorder?
Yeah. So I think the answer to that question is there's a million ways you go down this path. Our focus as a coalition is we really try to work with youth to prevent them from starting young. When I interview people in recovery and I ask them, how did your path start? It usually started with alcohol, marijuana, or tobacco products, either cigarettes or vaping, at a young age. And so they'll say, that was my first taste. And once I got that taste, I liked the feeling, and then I started using more and more and more. Where my friends could go to that party on the weekend, have a beer and be okay, I needed it all the time. But then there's the other side of the coin, the 50-plus population that we're seeing in some of our overdose statistics. Why are they overdosing? Have they been lifelong users, or did they get an injury, get prescribed a traditional painkiller like Oxycontin, any opiate-based painkiller, and then start misusing it, and it led down a path of addiction. So there's a lot of different ways that people go down this path. There's a lot of theories on why some people may get addicted to a substance and some people may not. I think I'm a firm believer in, if you have a predisposition to addiction, that might happen. If you've experienced some sort of trauma, it opens up that risk factor, and then there's peer pressure. So there's a lot of different things, and it doesn't discriminate. I think that's the big thing that we all push in this world, is that you could be a young kid who gets on this path, you could be in your 20s, you could be in your 50s.
All walks of life.
It does. All walks of life. I interviewed somebody the other day who became an alcoholic at 45, and so his entire life he had been free, and then he just started drinking a little bit more and a little bit more, and then had to go into into treatment.
Is that for those who are getting their first exposure to this issue, this dilemma? Is that the most surprising portion of it, where they're saying, it's 50, 55, 60-year-olds too, as well as just the young people? It isn't only those 18, 19, 20-year-olds.
It's not those troubled kids in the back of the classroom with their hoods over their head. I think it is. I think it's opening up that conversation that it can be anybody, and I think it does surprise people when we look at our county overdose statistics, and in 6 months the 50-plus has doubled. It opens that conversation. And unfortunately, a lot of times we focus on the 12 to 25-year-old group. My current funding focuses on the 12 to 25-year-old group because it's for prevention. But we also have to talk about prevention in all stages of life, because it could happen at any time.
Why do you think, in your time doing this, why do you think it's so hard to get the numbers, the appropriate numbers, the right numbers, or any reporting in general that works? Obviously, there's always going to be a degree of underreporting. But to just get is why?
I think the biggest factor is that, well, one, underreporting, does it get identified as an overdose, or is there something else medically happening there? So making sure you're getting that accurate feedback that way. The length of time it takes to get toxicology back, we're still waiting for numbers from 2017, and we're now in May of 2018, because it can take 6 to 9 months to get those toxicology results in from the various labs. If you're going up to Monroe County, we also use an outside lab for some cases, so it depends on what's going on. I think those are the main things, and then let's talk about people who don't pass away from this. I think there's still a stigma for families and for communities to keep this still sheltered. And so people still aren't necessarily talking about if this has touched their family. I think we're seeing more and more of that, but I think there still is that stigma and that hiding, if your son or daughter or your mom or dad or whoever is dealing with this, there's still not always that conversation going on. And that's one of our goals, is to start the conversation, and make sure that everybody's talking about this, because it can affect anybody.
So a couple of things. Obviously, I do want to get back into, in a couple minutes, how one can start that conversation, how that conversation can get going. But I want to first ask you, for those who think that problems like this have always been around, or they've just always existed, it seems now that there is pretty good data to support the notion that this hasn't always been around, and there has been a change through the 90s and into the early thousands. Where do you come down, and how do you try to educate the community on that sort of back and forth as it pertains to moving the whole issue forward?
Yeah. So how our coalition approaches it is we do community cafes around our county where we try to pick different topics to help educate on this epidemic.
Right.
And one of the things that we, our first cafe in a community is always, how did we get here? A brief history of the drug epidemic since 1996. And we kind of have that conversation, why it changed in 1996 and how it looks so different now versus then, before that, where you really only talked about alcohol, marijuana, maybe cocaine, but the opiate crisis has really changed the conversation. And then also educating on other things that are coming up, so just continuing having those conversations. We talk wherever, school districts, PTA meetings, Kiwanis, Rotary, pretty much
anyone who will listen.
Anyone who will listen. The other day I was at the American Legion Ladies Auxiliary Club talking to them about what was going on. And I brought an undercover agent who talked about what he was seeing in that particular community. And when I say jaws were to the floor because they didn't expect that they were seeing crack cocaine, they were seeing cocaine, they were seeing opiates. These were the things that they were seeing. I think they expected opiates and they expected marijuana. They did not expect to hear about crack and cocaine being in their community, and that's the reality. So how does somebody's curious, they want to know how to start this conversation. What's the easiest, I don't want to call it an icebreaker, but how do you start to have this conversation, and how do you start to have this conversation with children? I would imagine that if it's going to be effective, you have to start young and really get it ingrained, right? Yeah. So one of the things that I have a 9-year-old. So I always use her as my example.
Personal experience.
Yeah, okay. Personal experience. So, granted, with my job, I think she's probably got a little bit more knowledge than most 9-year-olds. But, when I'm out in the community, I say it's simply having that conversation with younger kids about medication safety, not sharing your medication, who can give you your medication, who's a trusted person who can do that, and how to have refusal skills. If somebody gives you something and you don't know what it is, you don't accept it, you don't take it, even if you have that pressure. And that might sound strange, starting at 7, 8, 9, but that's where that conversation has to start, is that, you don't give yourself medication. Here's the trusted adults who can. You always know what you're taking. This is how you read a label. We do a medication safety class for grades 4 through 6. And we make it fun, we make it Jeopardy, and the kids absolutely love it, but we want to make sure that they walk away with a few key messages. Don't share your medication, read the label first, and who can you trust, to give you medication. And then the final one is, where's your local drop box? Because we want them to push that with their parents.
Right.
So
I guess what I hear people say a lot is, well, that's common sense, but it isn't common sense, right?
Yeah, right? It's not necessarily common sense, and it's also making sure that you as adults are modeling appropriate behavior. And I don't mean to jump on that, but if your kids see you doing X, Y, and Z, they're going to model that behavior later on in life. And that might sound strange, but if
there's some pretty good science behind that behavior.
Yeah, there is. And so if to have a good time, there's always alcohol that's involved, or if you have a stressful day at work, you always have a drink, kids will mimic that behavior later on in life, and there's a lot of evidence to show that. If I always get this example when I'm talking to 4th through 6th graders, well, my mom shares their medication with me because we take the same medication. And what I always push back to them is have a conversation with your mom, because her medication's designed for her weight, your medication's designed for your weight, and it could be a safety concern, and so it's making sure you're modeling that behavior as well. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Yeah,
but
it definitely
does sound like a very simple thing, but when you're talking to kids that age, they will tell you everything that maybe their parents or other trusted adults might mimic for them.
So the next item that I want to get your take on is the actual push back toward the pharmaceutical industry. That has to be reassuring to someone like you, because it's got to be kind of like a aha, finally.
Yeah, finally.
Because this is something, like you said, mid-90s, something changed, and that something was probably pretty well connected to the pharmaceutical industry. And now we're going the other direction, it seems. So your thoughts on where that stands?
What I was really excited about is just yesterday, I think it was, Walmart has decided to reduce the amount of prescriptions they will give someone, and then you have to come back with either a new prescription or they'll give you another 7 days to reduce this epidemic if you've been prescribed an opiate painkiller. So I think you're seeing pushback to the pharmaceutical industries, but you're seeing pharmacies take a stance on this and say, okay, we're only going to do 7 days, and then you can come back and we'll give you an additional 7 days, so that way you can't misuse or abuse it. Companies are coming out with products so that you can't, I think it was RGH just came out with the cylinder that you can only get your opiate prescriptions every 6 hours, and so making sure that you can't misuse or abuse that way. But I am really excited to see that New York State, and particularly I believe Ontario County and Seneca County at least, signed on to be part of the lawsuit back towards the pharmaceutical companies to try to recoup some of the expense of this, because it's the manpower that it's taking law enforcement and EMS to respond to overdoses, the drain on the hospital system, the drain on public health, the drain on families. That's the number one thing that I hear about, is the emotional drain, the financial drain on families. If we can somehow help out with that, would be amazing. The cost of Narcan for EMS to carry. I've met with EMS people who are like, they've come back at me, you're giving out Narcan for free at your trainings, and it's costing us X, which at that time I think was about $1,000. We can't afford it, so we need help. And so, I think if it can help with any of that to help push back.
And to that point, Cuba County, Tompkins County also have jumped on in similar fashion lawsuits against the pharmaceutical industry. Narcan, let's talk about that, because that is one of those, it gets touchy, but at the same time, at least from my perspective, it seems pretty black and white. It's a necessary tool, and it's there, it exists, so why not? It can be easily administered. Training doesn't take that long. It isn't that much of a burden on the taxpayer. So walk us through what Narcan is, how it's administered, and a little bit of the training aspect of it.
So Narcan is the reversal drug for an opiate overdose. So if someone has taken an opiate and they are overdosing, what it does is the opiate receptor is kind of like a Y, and the opiate goes into that Y, fills that receptor, and if there's too much opiate in the system, the person's respiration and heart will slow down or stop. What Narcan does is it comes into that Y receptor, it kicks off the opiate for up to 20 minutes, and gives the person a chance to breathe and to get their heart back going. Sometimes it takes multiple doses of Narcan to actually have that happen, because of what we're seeing with the introduction of fentanyl and carfentanil into the heroin supply, or even if somebody has accidentally taken too much of their prescription painkiller, depending on how much they've taken, it might take multiple doses of Narcan. So when you administer their Narcan, it kicks off that opiate and allows the person to start breathing, hopefully. That's the goal, right? How do you administer it? It is just a nasal spray is the one that's given to the public. There also is an auto-inject and an injectable one that EMS carries. Right. And I don't think any law enforcement carries it, but EMS and the hospitals carry it. You can get trained. There's many local pharmacies that you can get Narcan using your insurance or paying a cash fee, and they'll give you a quick training. There's also a lot of public trainings out there. I know here in Seneca County, Dick Van Dyke offers trainings. In Ontario County, our public health office offers trainings, and of course there's one in Clifton Springs, and I texted my person just on my way here to get the date, and she didn't send it to me before I walked in. But I'll get that over to you so you can put it out. And then Strong Recovery up in Rochester does trainings 3 or 4 times a month. So there's lots of opportunities to get free trainings. When you go to the trainings, they're anywhere from a half an hour to an hour, depending on who the trainer is. They're going to walk you through how to identify an overdose. They're going to walk you through how that Narcan works, how to do rescue breathing or put somebody on their side while you're waiting for EMS. They're going to encourage you to call 911. They're going to go over the Good Samaritan Law. For those who don't know what the Good Samaritan Law is, it's an opportunity for people to call 911 and not get prosecuted if they are the caller or the person who's experiencing an overdose of any drugs, not just opiates. under certain circumstances. There's some caveats to that, but for the most part,
Right.
it's to try to save lives.
Right.
So they'll go over the Good Samaritan law. They'll teach you how to administer the Narcan. And they will have you fill out some paperwork, because if you do administer Narcan, they do ask you to send back a form so that they can stay up to date of how many kits are being used in New York State,
Of course.
and to send you a refill. So that's Narcan training in a nutshell, I think. Did I miss anything, Josh?
It's fascinating because the data really, it seems to bear out that it works. I mean, a 90+%, I believe, if those are the numbers that I've seen, 90+% success rate. And just with as frequently as we're seeing it in the headlines now, it seems to be embraced.
Yeah,
right?
the U.S. Surgeon General has actually announced that he thinks every citizen should carry Narcan because overdoses can happen anywhere. And I think that really highlights the amount of the gravity of this situation, that overdoses can happen in parking lots, they can happen in schools, they can happen in homes, they can really happen so that you're prepared. They can happen anywhere. I carry a kit with me. It's out in my car. It's with me at all times. I've been lucky. I haven't, even in my field, haven't had to use it,
Right.
But I'm prepared. There is controversy around it. The people who still feel this is a choice will say people are making this choice and you're saving their lives. You're handing out free medication to society when people have to pay for EpiPens and cancer medications and things like that. I put this in the same category as all of those things. You're saving a life. Do you know what I mean? In that moment, you're saving their life. And given that choice in that moment, I think we all can live with saving that life if it gives them that opportunity to go to treatment. One really cool thing is that, at least in Ontario County and Yates County, we have a special program called the Opiate STR. So we have teams that will respond to those overdoses and help that person get into treatment. And they're teams of peers. So they're people who have been down this journey, and they haven't just been down the opiate journey. They might be in recovery from alcoholism, cocaine, crack, opiates. They're in recovery from a lot of different things. And they'll meet that person, they'll meet their family, and help them get into treatment. And it's one of the most powerful things that I've seen in the last 2.5 years come to our community, because I think it's really making an impact. So we have Narcan that's happening. We have this peer team that's meeting those people where they overdose, at the hospital, at their homes, wherever. And it's helping our success rate get them into treatment, which is really what we ultimately want to do.
So treatment, and I just want to sort of quickly point out, for those who might be listening and thinking, but it doesn't cost anything if somebody just dies. Dying costs money too. It's all a burden, it's all a cost, and in some way, shape, or form, we have to invest and we have to just act and move forward. But let's talk about treatment. Where does the region lack right now in treatment? Obviously, beds, facility treatment beds, always seems to be the first thing that comes back. But there and elsewhere, where do we have the biggest opportunities to sort of capitalize and make way with this one?
I think, as we're currently going through a treatment redesign, and I'm not treatment, so this is my limited knowledge of this. Where we're getting more detox beds, we're getting more treatment beds. I think the biggest thing that communities need to understand is that the treatment bed might not be Clifton Springs that's available. It might be Monroe County. It might be Elmira. It might be all the way in the Bronx.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's because there is such a high demand. That's the reality. But I'm going to say a kind of positive statement on that. What I have learned from people that I have worked with that have been in recovery for a long time, sometimes it's a good thing to go to some of those other places and seek treatment, because it gets them out of the environment that they're used to, and it gets them away from the people that they know. And so they can seek that treatment, get on the right path, and then slowly integrate back into their local community, and figure out what boundaries they need to set, what environment changes they need to make, so that they can stay in a positive place, if that makes sense. So I'm actually
You're optimistic.
I am very optimistic. I think it's actually, sometimes I'll get a call from somebody, and again, I'm in prevention, but they'll be like, the only treatment bed's in Albany. I said, okay, take it.
Go.
Because that gets you in a new environment.
Right.
You focus on yourself. You're away from family, friends that can bring you down. Take it. right? I'm also a big component of, or supporter of NAAA and Celebrate Recovery. I think that they are a huge part of this conversation. We also have in Ontario County and in Monroe County, again, I don't know the other counties as well, we have a program that's focused on wellness. So once you've gotten yourself through treatment, you focus on things like exercise, arts and crafts, book clubs, reconnecting with your community in a positive manner, and that helps you in that journey in recovery. And so I think, honestly, the conversation has to move towards what are those things that can support people in this journey, what can help them change their environments, change their outlook, and that's where we need to focus. So those wellness programs, those support groups, those types of things. So, and I think that movement is happening, and it's happening in an amazing way. We've got people who are coming and walking in the park for an hour on a Saturday, and these are people who a year ago were the drudges of society in jail, and now they're with other community members, and they're doing great things,
Actual rehabilitation,
but it's taking a community to do that. It's not an agency. It's not, it's just people who care coming together. And there's people there who are recovering from substance use disorders. There's people there that are recovering from mental health issues. And then there's people there that just care. They don't fit any of those categories, but they want to be a part of this. So I think it's those types of things that are really going to make a change, and saying to people, we care about you, welcome back,
So obviously part of that community, all of the events that you guys host throughout the year, it's crazy. There's just Ontario County Substance Abuse Coalition, the Partnership for Ontario County, potentially two of the most active community organizations in the entire Finger Lakes, and I mean that genuinely. Community cafes, drug take-back programs, support groups, all these different things that you guys are doing. What's coming up, but also what's the secret? What is the secret to that sort of all-hands-on-deck approach?
Okay, so I think what the secret is having a lot of community members who have buy-in to what we're doing and helping us make this happen. 2 years ago, I think, when I came in to see you, Josh, it was me and a handful of people. I now have a listserv of about 125 people, and I'm going to give you a perfect example. On Monday, I had a calendar snafu where I got an email that said, hey, you're still coming to my health fair on Friday, and I was like, it's not on my calendar. And so I quickly sent out an email blast that said, hey, health fair on Friday, 8 to 11, I can't be there, can anybody go? Within 5 minutes, I had 2 members of the community email me back, yep, I can be there, when can I pick up the supplies? And one of them is a brand new volunteer with the coalition, and one of them is a seasoned volunteer with the coalition who's been with me for almost 2 years. And so that is what makes all of those events happen. I always say I'm just the puppet master. I am just the person who throws the idea out there, and then I ask the community to pull it together, if that makes sense. That's how we do it.
That's how you do it. It's not rocket science. I think that's very anticlimactic compared to what some people might have thought there being a big administrative effort behind, but really it's just community buy-in.
It is. But what I said before we started going on the air, it's taken 2.5 years to get that community buy-in, I think. And it's constantly being out there saying, we're going to have the conversation, and here's where we're going to have the conversation. And we might get 6 people, and we might get 150 people, and I'm happy whether it's 6 or 150, because those 6 people care, those 150 people care. And then it's just making sure you keep them informed, and in valuing whatever they can help you with. If it's dropping off brochures one day, or if it's being my traffic person at take-back days, that's okay. I might see you once a year. I'm okay with that. Just be part of the conversation and help us stop this tide, however you can. So what are some of the events that are coming up in the next
We got
like
month and a half, 2 months, because you guys have so many. I don't want to have you have to go off here for 15 minutes on
Nope. So actually, we only have, I think, 4 major events coming up. So May 18th, we are going to be at a little pizzeria in Bloomfield having that How Did We Get Here conversation. It's LB Pizzeria. We're going to be there at 6:30. And you might get a slice of pizza while you're there, and we're just going to have pizza's a good draw. We're just going to have a conversation. So LB Pizzeria, May 18th, 6:30. May 19th, we're going to be at the Richmond Town Hall doing a drug take-back day from 9 to noon. People can bring any unwanted over-the-counter prescription or pet medication, and that's a big one. Making sure you get all medications out of your house that you don't want, because I'm going to give you the 3 reasons before I go to the next event. Prevents addiction, prevents accidental poisoning, and protects the environment, because we don't want to get it in the water supply. So that's going to be at the Richmond Town Hall. And then May 24th, we are going to be at the Naples School District. That's a suicide prevention forum. But that, again, is on the same topic. Mental health and substance use disorder go hand in hand. So that's a Talk Saves Life forum at 7 o'clock on May 24th. And then in June 26th, we're going to be having a cafe also in Naples, and that's addiction. That's what we titled it, Addiction, the Ripple Effect. So how it affects communities, families, schools, basically everybody that it touches outside of just the individual who has gone down that path. So those are our 4 major events right now. Now, the wellness program that I kind of referenced earlier, that's a whole nother animal. They do 3 to 4 events a week where people can come together, and I can get you on that listserv so you can see that, because I can't even keep track. Somebody else monitors that. I can't even keep track of everything.
It's just too much.
It's amazing. They got a 5K coming up on August 4th. They do a lot. So
that's awesome. You do a lot too, and I just want to say thank you. As somebody who watches the news and watches the headlines, it's good to see people who really care making a difference and actually making some positive ground in the process, because it can seem very, very, very overwhelming. So thank you, and thank you for coming in today. Again, we'll have you back. This is a conversation that's just really enjoyable to have, because you guys are finding success.
Well, thank you, Josh, for having me.
Well, that is going to do it for us today. I'd like to thank Petrea, our listeners, and of course, FingerLakes1.com for making this podcast possible. You can catch Inside the FLX on Saturdays during the 10 o'clock hour on WDWN 89.1 FM in Auburn or 97.7 FM in Fulton. The program also airs on Sundays and Tuesdays at 7 p.m. on Spectrum Channel 1304 and is available on iTunes, Stitcher, and the FingerLakes1.com app. Stay informed, Finger Lakes, and we will catch you next time.